Once upon a time, a star fell from the eternal heavens bearing a magical golden relic. A powerful eternal goddess sealed the ruinous flame, her forgotten child, bearing another very special, mysterious flame. Settle down, tuck in, and dream of the Land of Shadow.
The Land of Shadow, a place obscured by the Erdtree, where the goddess Marika first set foot. A land purged in an unsung battle, set ablaze by Mesmer's flame. It was to this land that Mikla departed, divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden.
The giant tree looks like the Erdtree being suffocated by Deathroot. There's this theory I really like by a TikToker, NotPrecursor.
This is actually in fact the Helfen.
This idea was also mentioned later in VaatiVidya's trailer analysis.
Called the Helfen.
The Helfen steeple states, great sword patterned after the black steeple of the Helfen, the lampwood which guides the dead of the living world. The lamplight is similar to Grace in appearance, only it is said that it can only be seen by those who have met their death in battle. According to the root resin item description, the roots of the Great Tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, or so they say, and it is for this reason the catacombs are built around the Great Tree roots. Deathroot. On the night of the dire plot, the stolen rune of death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the rune of death spread across the lands between, through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. Map of Deeproot Depths. At the very depths of the Erdtree's majestic roots lies the source of Ansel and the Sofra rivers. Here, too, begins the network of the Great Tree's roots that spread throughout the lands between. I see this map as saying the Erdtree's roots begin here, and so do the Great Tree's. So you know how all the trees are depicted with roots? Okay, so what if this is because it is reflective of the health of both parts of the tree? Like, this is the Shadow Tree and this is the Erdtree. The Great Tree is both the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree when they were once physically connected. Well, if Mikla's Halig Tree is somewhat a model for what the Great Tree used to be. There's the Golden Tree and the Shadow Tree, but they were once one thing. Some think it is only referring to the Erdtree, but that was before there was two trees. According to the Famitsu article, Miyazaki states,
due to something story-related, the worlds became physically separated. Erdtree refers to the golden tree that appears in the main title. So, directly interpreting this, the DLC title means the shadow of this golden tree. In the concept art that was shown in February of 2023, it is this shadow of the Erdtree that looms tall in the left background. And we also call this the Shadow Tree. So the DLC takes place not in the lands between, but the Shadowlands of which the Shadow Tree is a symbol. Also, there is another small hidden meaning in the title. We hope you will figure this out when playing the game.
So here are our first major pieces of context. 1. This tree is called the Shadow Tree. 2. The Land of Shadow and the lands between were once physically connected. 3. A plot point in the story physically separates the Land of Shadow and the lands between. I think that something has to do with Fair Missoula and the Elden Ring and Malekith's boss chamber. See, I always thought it was strange how Deathroot popped up in the most random places. Sure, it's spreading through the Great Roots, but like, how? It doesn't really make sense. It would make sense if the Great Tree is the only thing to connect the worlds together. A few details to note here. Miyazaki talks about the small meaning in the title. The main thing I have noticed upon the trailer and the title releasing is that it looks like the roots are feeding into each other on the O. There's also the medallion for the Lift of World, which depicts roots reaching far below the Divine Towers. The words Shadow of the Erdtree are more shattered than the words Elden Ring, according to an interview Miyazaki did with Edge boss encounter.
The rings that you're looking at in the logo are not so much a representation of those factions, as you put it, but more a representation of the law of the world, the rules, and the order.
Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision, a god in truth. But after the Elden Ring's shattering, she was imprisoned in the Erdtree.
Maybe, since the Elden Ring is reflective of the fundamental laws of the world, then the Elden Ring depicted in Fair Missoula was broken off from the main Elden Ring, and this is also what separated the Golden Tree from the Shadow Tree.
Maybe the now Shadow Tree is actually the real Erdtree. As Moxie mentioned, shattering the Elden Ring also shattered the Erdtree. It could be that this is the reason we see the Erdtree part in the Shadow Tree tilted, as if it's about to fall over. It is also possible that the, let's call it Haligtree part, is holding up the Erdtree here instead of strangling it. This would mean that the Erdtree we see in the lands between is indeed, as theorized by so many, an illusion. But that's just a theory.
Going back to the Famitsu article.
Also, one other main pillar of the DLC story is the history of this Shadowland and the history of Queen Marika.
Famitsu. So, there have been many details just revealed. Please, let me ask more. You just mentioned Queen Marika's history. Does this mean that the DLC takes place in the past?
No, it takes place in the same time as the main title. The setting is not in the distant past or future. The Shadowlands in Queen Marika's past will be told in the same manner as the Shattering was in the main title. That is in fact Mikola. And it is he who traveled to the Land of Shadow, and it's the players who will be tracing his path and following in his footsteps, trying to see what he's going to do there. Another axis of the story is Queen Marika and what she did in the Land of Shadow, and what led Mikola to follow her there. In fact, the Land of Shadows is the place where Marika became a god and the Golden Tree was born.
Okay, so Miyazaki gives us more important context here. 4. This takes place in a parallel time with the lands between, not the future, not the past. 5. Echoes of Queen Marika will reveal more of Marika's past, most likely. 6. Marika ascended to godhood in the Land of Shadow. 7. The Golden Tree, the Erdtree, was born in the Land of Shadow. Here's what we know about the birth of the Erdtree. According to the sword monument in the mountaintops of the giants, the war against the giants, champions battle, trolls betray, fire vanquished, the era of the Erdtree begins. Smithing Stone 8, thought to have been used to hone the weapons of the champions of the war against the giants at the birth of the Erdtree. Why does going to the mountaintops and wrecking the giants begin the era of the Erdtree? The Remembrance of the Fire Giant states, the Fire Giant is a survivor of the war against the giants. Upon realizing that the flames of the forge would never die, Queen Marika marked him with a curse.
O trifling giant, mayst thou tend thy flame for eternity.
In Marika's own words, put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
When the Erdtree flourished, even the demigods could not stave off its effects, despite their nigh godhood.
And finally, Bandit pointed out that the Elden Ring is the source of the Erdtree, which somehow I missed. So, naturally, perhaps, then the Elden Ring being shattered led to the Erdtree itself becoming also shattered. 8. Queen Marika's actions led Mikola to follow her. The superior incantation of the fire monks, Surge O Flame, states, the giant's flame is the flame of ruin, capable of burning the Erdtree, and so, following the war of the giants, its ruinous blaze was sealed, and the guardians were appointed to watch over it. The blaze was sealed. I wonder where they could have put a giant basket of ruinous fire. I mean, I seriously do not know how no one is talking about this. But I think that Marika banished the Flame of Ruin to the Shadow Realm. I'm sending you to the Shadow Realm. perhaps this is how the world of Shadow was created in the first place.
Yes, the Shadowlands in which the DLC takes place are sundered from the lands between where the main story takes place. It has been removed from and hidden from the outside world, and this veil is a symbol of that.
Sunder, to break apart or in two. Separate by or as if by violence or by intervening time or space.
Split apart, okay. 9. The Shadow World is split apart from the lands between. 10. The veil is symbolic of the Land of Shadows, that is, hidden from the lands between. The Church of Manicelis, or as I lovingly refer to it, Church of Hand, is visible in the trailer. When the Tarnished goes to the Moonlight Altar in the game, it's kind of weird, almost otherworldly. Here is also one of the places that I noticed the moon overlaps with the Erdtree, where the moon eclipses the Erdtree and reveals Ronnie's dark moon. So maybe there's certain areas of overlap between the lands between and the Shadow World. Maybe these areas will provide additional context to what's happening. Let us turn our attention back to the veil. Marika's Mischief is an item that I've puzzled over for a long time. I always thought this was used to trick Renala into falling in love, as Renala was one of Marika's last adversaries. Though, I think that Vati is the one that brought this disjointed idea to life. The veil effect looks eerily similar to the sky and the veil here. When Godric was hounded from Lindell, the royal capital, this was one of the multitude of treasures he took with him, also known as Marika's Mischief. The narrator in this item description seems to be alluding to what's going on here. Maybe this item was merely a joke or a poke at what Marika did in the Land of Shadow. This is Marika's Mischief. Another thing to solidify this idea is Marika's bedchamber, which everyone and their mother and their neighbor and God has pointed out. Bandit pointed out that it reminds him of the Concealing Veil, which makes sense given Marika's connection with the Newman. Newman's Ruin. The Newman are said to have come from outside the Lands Between, and are in fact of the same stock as Queen Marika herself. The Black Knives were Newman. The Newman are said to be descendants of Akai, which means spirit world, underworld, or next world. So the Newman could be descendants of the people from the Shadow World. Another incantation this veil reminded me of was Darkness, incantation of the Two Fingers servants, who once served as assassins of the Round Table Hold. The assassins themselves were once tarnished, who had strayed from the guidance, and they pursued their duty in the darkness, that is, without grace.
Divesting himself of his flesh, his strength, his lineage, of all things golden.
So, these things are likely connected. In the trailer, there are 2 different shots of the Shadow Tree. In the first one, it is more sickly and blackened, covered in that veil. Now, a Shadow World obviously has something to do with the eclipse, right? There are 3 items associated with the eclipse. The Eclipse Shuttle, storied sword and treasure of Castle Sol that depicts an eclipsed sun drained of color. Eclipse Crest Heater Shield. The sun in eclipse is said to be the symbol of a wandering mausoleum where the soulless demigods slumber. Eclipse Crest Great Shield. The eclipsed sun drained of color is the protective star of a soulless demigod. It aids the mausoleum knights by keeping destined death at bay. There are clear ties between the eclipse and the soulless demigods, so I wonder if it won't just be Mesmer, but more demigods. If you're interested in a deeper dive on Mesmer, I highly recommend checking out Smotown's lore breakdown. I'm not going to elaborate on Mesmer here because that would lead to an utter derailment of speculation. Anywho, back to the eclipse. There are 2 different stranded souls who talk about the eclipse.
O great sun, frigid son of soul, surrender yourself to the eclipse. Grant life to the soulless bones. The sun has not been swallowed. Our prayers were lacking. Your comrade remains soulless. I will never set my eyes upon it now. Your divine Erdtree.
So, something needs to swallow the sun. Does the sun being swallowed mean the sun is in eclipse? In other words, it looks like Mikla did some kind of magic something, which has an effect on the tree. being some kind of alchemical stuff that Quelaag, Zyostorm, and many others have crackpot alchemical theories on by now, I'm sure of it. The sun is usually swallowed by a moon in an eclipse. An eclipse cannot happen if the stars are not in motion.
The stars alter the fate of the Carian royal family, and the fate of your mistress Rani. But long ago, General Radahn challenged the swirling constellations, and in a crushing victory arrested their cycles.
Star Scourge Heirloom, the mightiest hero of the demigods, confronted the falling stars alone, and thus did he crush them, his conquest sealing the fate of the stars.
Now he is the force that repulses the stars. If General Radahn were to die, the stars would resume their movement.
Radahn has to be dead for the Tarnished to enter the World of Shadow. So, the fate of the stars is important to both the Land of Shadows itself, and Mikla's journey is dependent on it as well. Which, on a side note, is this Radahn? Like, you know... Like you know how Moog and Morgoth have like two forms? Like, is this what's happening here? Like, that's Radahn, right? The eclipse is incredibly significant to Mikla's character arc. His motivations are twofold: bring Godwyn a true death, and cure Malenia's scarlet rot. Somehow, the eclipse would bring about some change within Mikla, and that would allow him to reach his goals. And perhaps even godhood. There is a sign that appears as an in-game message in the Sainted Hero's grave. Shadow bathes in light and knows weakness. An eclipse is essentially standing in the shadow and looking up at a light source. Is this the way in which Mikla will bring about an eclipse? So, a shadow is typically cast from a light source being blocked by a physical object, right? However, what's confusing is that there isn't really a sun present per se, just the Erdtree. There is a little sun on the sundial in the corner of the map, which everybody on Twitter is going crazy over right now, and the Sun Realm Shield. Shield of Honor depicting a city crowned by the sun. It has seen better days. Much like the wear upon the shield, the seed of the sun is long faded away. This can be farmed from the skeletons near the hermit merchant shack in Altus Plateau. Some have speculated that this could be a reference to Anor Londo as an Easter egg. An Easter egg? Okay, so if you know one thing about me, you know that anything in the game is up for grabs to speculate about, right? I have heard it proposed a few times that this universe is tied to Dark Souls and Bloodborne in more ways than one. I'm on the first Dark Souls right now, and I'm still just learning the lore. So, alright, hear me out. Soul of Light, claimed by Gwyn, is the Lord of Sunlight. The item description for the Crown of the Dark Sun states, Crown of the Dark Sun Gwyndolin, protector of the forsaken city of Anor Londo. This crown of the gods demands faith immeasurable of its wearer, but is imbued with the dark moon power that enhances all magic. The image of the sun manifests Gwyndolin's deep adoration of the sun. Kyle, I can hear your keyboard, just hold on and let me cook. Gwyn had some kids, right? And the first one, the mysterious one, the one removed from history that y'all puzzle over, that kid, according to the soul of the Nameless King. The Nameless King was once the dragon-slaying god of war, before he sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. Can you just wait a second? According to the Ring of the Firstborn, Lord Gwyn's firstborn, who inherited the sunlight, once wore this ancient ring, boosts the strength of miracles. Lord Gwyn's firstborn was a god of war, but his foolishness led to the loss of the annals and rescinding of his Definic status. Today, even his name is not known. The firstborn kid of Gwyn, the unnamed one, inherited the sunlight and allied with the ancient dragons. That is so funny and quirky. There's this guy named Godwyn that just so happened to also fight and then ally with the dragons. Shut up. And a lady is depicted standing next to a tall guy in a crown in Fair Missoula, which, like, also, look in the middle of this crown. Look, what is that? That kind of looks like the eye of the fire giant. right? And the symbol that we have seen repeated over and over and over again, 8 circles around what looks like a star. All right, I get it. All right, I get it. Dark Souls and Elden Ring don't connect. All right, no fun allowed. I got it. Fine. All right. Then I got an in-universe explanation since you can't handle a crackpot theory. It could also be this place here, in this shot of this land. Maybe Marika hid the seat of the sun here in the land of shadow. That's boring. Let's go a little more speculative. This place definitely fits the description of the seat of the sun. I really love the way that this Redditor put it. u/TheBloodMakesUsHuman posted 2 years ago.
My speculation is that the seat of the sun may actually be Farum Azula. It is dropped by skeleton warriors in the crumbling city in the sky, and skeletons located next to ruins of Farum Azula found across the land, and those who live in death and the corruption of destined death is also present there too. Furthermore, Farum Azula literally floats in the sky closest to the sun, and is perpetually in daylight, even if it is nighttime mechanically speaking. It is also an ancient civilization and city that has long faded away, slowly crumbling since time immemorial. I think it fits surprisingly well as the Sun Realm of antiquity, though obviously, Castle, Sol, and its prior kingdom may have an in-world connection to the shield too.
I don't think this Redditor is too far off base either, because, if we assume that this is the seat of the sun, then maybe it got disconnected from the Land of Shadow. Everyone's always assumed that's either come from Caelid around the Bestial Sanctum or the capital, including myself. However, my best friend and homie Benoon, who recently became Elden Lord, noticed that this part of the building looks almost exactly the same as Farum Azula. It's always in sunlight after all. There's a bridge to nowhere. It's blackened and broken off, cast into darkness, opposite of what Farum Azula is. Deathroot also seems to be present at this structure, which is also crumbling. It also has similar towers and architecture, down to these pillars on the bottom matching up to the pillars on the top in the shot in the trailer. The overall structure and the shape match. It would make more sense that Farum Azula, being from the Land of Shadow, somehow puts it in a perpetual storm beyond time, like some kind of rift in the space-time continuum. I speculate that the Elden Ring in Malka's boss chamber was once combined with the Elden Ring that was inside of Marika. She shattered the Elden Ring, which shattered these two worlds. Farum Azula was never meant to be part of this world. When the lands between were physically separated, Farum Azula was split from this place right here. Marika was probably the one to physically separate these lands. But then the question becomes, why would she do this? Was it for survival of her race? Was it for a vicious form of tyrannical power? Or was she hiding this land from something else? Okay, so let's take a moment to focus on the overall structure of this world. Since the launch of the trailer, I've done a ton of mock-ups of how this world is structured. First things first, the Land of Shadow is likely in the space between all the Divine Towers, right where that mysterious little cloud is. As many of you know, the Divine Towers make a hexagon, so it is speculated by many that this is more than likely where that huge hunk of land, a little bit bigger than Limgrave, would be located. There's this one, which is an interesting way of visualizing the world, and this is how I thought of the Land of Shadow initially, until I saw a map reconstruction. There is the user ZyoidaX, who constructed a diagram by carefully analyzing the structures and landmasses in the background. I find this to be incredibly accurate and helpful for establishing our bearings. As you can see by this little bump in the Land of Shadow is most likely not mirrored. Then while gathering footage, I noticed the beams coming from the Erdtree in a different light. I think these beams are part of the veil concealing the Land of Shadow. Imagine the lands between stacked directly on top of the Land of Shadow. This seems to be accurate, and it would line up with my speculation about Farum Azula, and I think the veil is what would have severed Farum Azula from this structure. TLGTW and I were having a private discussion in Discord when the trailer came out, and she mentioned a thought about the lands between being memories for the Erdtree, which has lived in my head rent-free since she suggested it. What had me going back and forth over and over is that O in the title. If the Shadow Tree is truly stacked on top of the Erdtree, then how would it connect? It could be Fair Missoula, but it just doesn't seem to fit with geography. Then it dawned on me while looking at this post by Ziostorm about the Round Table Hold. It clicked. If you look at the icon for the site of Grace at the Round Table, it's so obvious. The Round Table Hold could be the top of the veil connecting the two worlds. This seems to fit way too perfectly, so I began researching and found a post by Nameless Singer on Reddit about Yggdrasil, which is the official name of the World Tree in Norse mythology. Shout out to Ratatasker and the Yggdrasil podcast. Smo and Ratatasker talk about some really interesting stuff in the most recent one. Back to Yggdrasil. It's seriously incredible how Nameless Singer pinpointed this concept and what it could mean for the story 2 years ago. I'll give you their TLDR. Both the Norse World Tree and the Erdtree are trees of memory, into which the lives, fates, and remembrances of the individuals are hewn. Our dropped runes look like tiny Erdtree sprouts because they are made of the same substance, this golden light. There are a set of concepts that are roughly equivalent. Souls equal runes equal remembrances, equal memories equal gold, equal grace equal life, equal substance the Erdtree is made of. We encountered 2 versions of the Round Table Hold. The one in Lindell is the present day version. The one Melina takes us to is a memory of the past. I highly recommend reading their whole post because there's a whole lot of interesting crackpot details I left out. And there's one thing I know in my time of learning Zelda lore as well. A kami in human form cannot contain a massive amount of supernatural power. So, perhaps it was never Marika in control. Elden Stars. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring. The Elden Beast became the Elden Ring. Only Empyreans are able to house the Elden Ring as its vessel. Now, consider this. If a Tarnished chooses one of the mending endings, the choice of how the Tarnished mends the rune is reflected by the Erdtree. So the Elden Beast is the Elden Ring, and I think that the Elden Ring is also the Erdtree. There is likely a connection between the Bell of Calling and the Shadow World. Bell of Calling, a bell capable of summoning various spirits from ashen remains. And this is exactly what the Elden Beast is able to do. This goes a step further. Remember how Miyazaki mentioned that there was a secret in the title? If you merely look at the full figure of the Elden Beast, it is almost instantly apparent how much of a striking resemblance it has to both the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree. One side of the Elden Beast is shrouded in darkness, while the tail looks like a miniature of the Erdtree. What if the Erdtree and the Shadow Tree are 2 parts of the same whole? That whole is the Elden Beast.
The sun has not been swallowed.
Notice how there's a gash across the midsection of the Elden Beast? The curse mark. The curse mark Godwyn and Ronnie share was a hint. This injury likely came from the Rune of Death, being stolen from the Elden Ring. I think that the Rune of Death is a curse mark for the Elden Beast. And I think the Mending Rune tells a miniature story of the Elden Beast's full story. This could mean that the Shadow Tree is a reflection of the Erdtree, bearing the curse that gave the Elden Beast power. Marika would have never been in control once she became a vessel for the Elden Ring.
Queen Marika was driven to the brink.
Radagon and Marika's source seals. Solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike the gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. This becomes apparent when fighting the Elden Beast. This thing flies up and casts a veil of light with a ring, the same as Marika's bedchamber, the same as the Mimic Veil, the same as the Land of Shadow, meaning it could be the Elden Beast controlling Marika as a puppet. The Elden Beast casts multiple rings, that have similar veils. Are these meant to be other worlds? The Land of Shadows, where the upcoming DLC is set, is not just a separate realm, but a critical piece of the world's history and the cycle of the Erdtree and the Elden Ring. The speculation around the Flame of Ruin, Marika's manipulation of the shadows, and the significance of the eclipse in Mikla's ambitions all point toward a complex interplay between the divine and the natural and the cosmic forces at work in the game's universe. In conclusion, the idea that the Land of Shadow might house the Flame of Ruin, thereby playing a pivotal role in both past calamities and potential restoration or further destruction of the Erdtree, adds a layer of depth and history to the lands between. As we look forward to exploring the Land of Shadows in the DLC, let us ponder the complexities of this world that Miyazaki and his team have created, where every shadow hides a story, and every light casts a shadow. Quote, "This Golden Order is something that the Elden Ring may have once represented, but not directly. It's more about how you apply those rules and how you enforce them on the physical world, and what effects they have on it. So it's more the influence of these demigods that existed a long time before, and how they applied these concepts of order and discipline. That's what's being represented by the Elden Ring, and these overlapping, intersecting rings." Hidetaka Miyazaki. So it's more about how the demigods applied order and discipline, since obviously the base game is more focused on order than naturally, perhaps, the DLC will be focused around the theme of discipline. I don't know about you, but discipline seems to fit the vibe of Mesmer. First off, Mesmer addresses Marika as if she's physically present in the space.
"Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?"
This gives off the feeling that Mesmer feels a little betrayed, right? If we apply the notion of discipline to the sentiment, then perhaps it's Mesmer's job to discipline and to punish us. Now, Tarnished archaeologists first pointed out the stark similarity between the Eternal Cities and the real-world Eternal Cities of Rome. Rome had 3 major cities: Alexandria, Rome, and Athens. The Romans favored the most brutal of punishments. Often, they'd enslave the people to build structures. To the Romans, sacrifice was necessary to appease the gods. If you were a debtor or a thief and could hold a weapon, then you could be sent to the Colosseum to serve your sentence. One of the first things done when indoctrinated into gladiatorial combat is a ripe whip, a leather whip not originally used for combat, but as an instrument of pain. Every surface of a grand entrance in Roman architecture has something carved into it. Rulers, stories, folklore, laws, regulations were all carved. So it's no surprise to see whipping depicted in a relief in the grand entrance of the Colosseum. There's a relief of a lion on the floor which matches very closely with the design on the ceiling in Florence Cathedral, which I'll come back around to. The duelist helm, bronze helm decorated with innumerable snakes, worn by gladiators who are driven from the Colosseum. The wearer becomes slightly easier to target for foes. The snake is viewed as a traitor to the Erdtree, and the audience delighted in seeing these bronze effigies beaten and battered. According to the collector, Thrax and Thracian gladiatorial helmets derived from earlier enemies of the Roman Empire who continued to appear after the Emperor Augustus. And I think it's easy to see that these are the inspiration. It goes deeper though. There's this whole ancient religion around snakes. Serpent god's curved sword fashioned in the image of an ancient serpent deity, and tool of a forgotten religion practiced on Mount Gelmir, formerly used to offer up sacrifices.
In Marika's own words, "Hear me, demigods, my children beloved, make of thyselves that which ye desire, be it a lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices." So,
we have a few themes going on here. Pain, punishment, and sacrifice. Maybe a little bit of humiliation for fun. The beaten and the punished wear snakes, so I wonder what that says about Mesmer's character. If we lean a little deeper into the idea of snakes and deities, both Greece and Rome have their own gods that use snakes as a symbol for different themes. We've all seen the medical symbol before, right? That symbol comes from the staff of Asclepius, which is held by the Greek god of healing and medicine, Asclepius. This often gets confused with the Vijaves. This guy was one of the first Roman gods to be born wielding either arrows, lightning bolts, or a pilum, which is like a spear. It is speculated that the Vijaves may have been an ill-omened counterpart of Jupiter, the Greek god of the sky and thunder. I mentioned Yggdrasil in the last episode, and something I learned from this channel called Norse magic and beliefs is that the fates of men are hewn into the wood of the tree. Also, there's a snake that gnaws at the roots in the underworld called Nidhogg. Sleipnir, Odin's horse, is a slippery little horse guy in Norse mythology, which couldn't help but remind me of another slippery little guy. Given that Mesmer is one of the demigods with a lot of snake symbology, I wonder if he is in some way deriving power from the Deathroot here, if this is indeed Deathroot, that is. There's another influential snake statue called the Laocoon Group, made between 40 to 20 BCE, according to the Digital Sculpture Project. The statue depicts a Trojan in struggle with two serpents as a priest of a doomed city. This guy right here was supposed to be guarding the gate. The serpents were said to be sent by the gods so as to not reveal what the Trojan horse is hiding. So God sent the snakes to kill this guy. The Colosseums of ancient Rome held gladiatorial combat for entertainment. Gladiators were typically debtors, slaves, and traders. Gladiators were basically the hottest celebrities, if you were good at it. It's easy to see the likeness that the Colosseums in Lindell share with the largest ones built in Rome's capital. Now, looking at the brick on the Colosseums, the brick is not aligned. In fact, it looks rebuilt from some other structure, so I began looking for historical influences in actual Colosseums, but with no luck. But then, look kid, I found it. I found the Porta Nigra in Trier, Germany. The Porta Nigra, meaning Black Gate or Black Door, was built out of gray sandstone in 170 AD. Previously known as the Mars Gate, it never had construction completed. Some of the stones from this gate were taken and used for other buildings, after they were no longer used as gates, that is. Iron and lead were used as mortar, and some of it was even broken out of the walls for reuse, which can be seen by the left side of the gate. Another part that matches the Colosseums is the upper part of the Divine Bridges. Pillar design, stone type, and proportions are consistent with these structures. What's more is that the reliefs of what Tarnished Archaeologist speculates to be the Great Tree are also on the Divine Bridges. There is an addition of the sainted statues. These statues are found beneath Stormveil and in the catacombs all throughout the lands between. The main connection is the prominent display of the quatrefoil on the reliefs. This quatrefoil design is also stamped down the highways connecting the Eternal Cities. The Florence Cathedral is definitely an inspiration around the designs in both the Eternal Cities and this building in the DLC. They have these windows that are not decorated, and they appear to be black from the outside, much like the ones in the Eternal Cities, which also seems to have colosseums built within these corresponding regions. And the string courses of the Florence Cathedral are reminiscent of the building in the DLC, along with the color and the shapes of the roofs. Axe Talisman. The Lord who led the long march bore an axe, and his loyal warriors honored him by wielding axes of their own, making them very effective at dealing decisive blows. Duelist Great Axe. Great Axe designed for gladiatorial combat, used by duelists who were exiled from the Colosseum. The Romans were surrounded by enemies, both to the north and to the south. To the north were the Gaelic, the Germanic, and the Brittonic tribes. These tribes collectively made up the peoples of Gaul. To the south were the Punic peoples, also known as Carthaginians, and sometimes called the Western Phoenicians. What is recorded about these peoples was written by the Romans, and the Romans were not fond of the people from Gaul or the Carthaginians. Many others have pointed out the nautical Celtic inspiration, such as Smowtown, Quelaag, and Tarnished Archaeologist. However, I personally found a lot of influence with understanding the clan of Horalu and the story surrounding it. The Celtics came in, wrecked Rome, and offered to leave for a large amount of silver. They lived to the north of Rome and readily abused their neighbors, and it was not a good time. The peoples of Gaul were mostly depicted as barbarians in what little is written by the Romans. The Romans saw themselves as morally superior to the people of Gaul. The peoples of Gaul were taller and a lot stronger than the Romans. Like, imagine a giant brawny guy like Godfrey coming down and slaughtering an entire village, then demanding that you pay him. And due to subdivisions in the Gaelic tribes, it made it a lot easier for Caesar to steamroll them. Caesar killed and enslaved a third of the population of Gaul. Phoenician equals Punic equals treacherous. Now, if I say Punic, you say treacherous. Punic, treacherous, Punic, treacherous. Very good, because we're all definitely pro-Roman here, right? The Romans would raise legions to fight Punic, you didn't say it that time, these wars where the Romans would almost instantly die to Hannibal, who was party rocking around Italy. Scipio the Older, a Roman, defeated Hannibal, a Carthaginian, in the Second Punic, treacherous, good job, war and took part of the Phoenician Empire, which is modern-day Spain. Scipio Jr. took Carthage by force, burning it to the ground. Seems familiar.
Set Ablaze by Mesmer's Flame.
Ah, yes, maybe that's why. This made Carthage a shadow, and the people could not wage war without Roman consent. Does this seem familiar?
In Marika's own words, my lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar, where ye will live and die.
In Spain, but the S is silent, is a tower called the Leaning Tower of Zaragoza, also known as Torre Nueva, New Tower. This tower was built in 1504 during the reign of the Catholic monarchs and was a symbol for the city. This tower inspired the Collegiata di Santa Maria la Colle, which is also located in Spain. Both of these towers are affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, and both seem to have inspired the design of the Divine Towers. Here's another thing about the Romans. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, they believe that the wind's direction could foretell the future, which is interesting with how the wind blows in a lot of the cutscenes of the demigod children. From the time of the trailer, I kept wondering why these pillars twist like that in the background. I thought, what an odd design choice. It seemed to be specifically referencing something. So, I went on Pinterest, typed in spiral pillar, and scrolled till I found this. The Archbasilica of St. John Lateran. Founded in 324 AD, the archdiocese serves as the seat of the Pope of Rome. Now, I know what you're thinking. Mox, this doesn't look like this place in the trailer. You're right, but the cloister attached to the monastery does. These spiral pillars fit nicely as an inspiration. The designs on the pillars are done with a cosmatesque, which means highly decorated inlaid mosaic tile. The spiral pattern may also be the St. Peter's baldachin, which looks like the baldachin blessing, and the spiral pillars in the main field of the Land of Shadow. The Greeks laid around a lot, did math, poetry, art, talked a lot about their thoughts about thoughts. The Mogwin Palace can be likened to the Parthenon, which is a temple in the Athenian Acropolis, Greece. This temple was dedicated in the 5th century BC to the goddess Athena. Once again, this was first spotted by Tarnished Archaeologist, and I can't recommend their stuff enough, because I wouldn't have even glanced at the subject if it wasn't for them. The Parthenon was a treasury for the Athens Empire. The temple honored the goddess of wisdom and war, Athena, represented by this monumental statue within the Acropolis. There is a snake on the inside of the shield, and it was actually pretty difficult to track down the origins of the snake, but I found it. The snake is said to represent Erythonios, and the story behind this is very interesting. The smith god tried to riz Athena, and in his failed attempt, the semen that fell to the earth became the snake. Athena wanted to raise the snake in secret, so she put it in a box and gave it to 3 daughters. This is why the snake is hidden behind the shield. Tempted by curiosity, the sisters either saw a half-human serpent or a serpent coiled around an infant. Either way, they went insane and threw themselves from the Acropolis.
Mother, wouldst thou truly lordship sanction in one so bereft of light?
This snake, Erythonius, later became the king of Athens. It's interesting to note that the ancestral spirits are also inside of various temples in the region. When we interact with these spirits, we are taken somewhere else. Perhaps maybe a dream? Regal ancestral spirits. Ancestral spirits exist as a phenomenon, beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death, as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living. Miquella is here, in one of these temples, beyond the influence of the Erdtree. This somewhat implies Miquella's need to be here, in this specific temple. I suppose now would be the best time to bring up the structure that looks similar to the Parthenon in the shadow of the Erdtree. This one's atop of what looks like a divine tower, connected by what looks like more of the giant's pillars. But here is just so off-putting. Like, yes, kind of looks like the Parthenon, but you see the rounded archways between the pillars? That's an arcade. It's a Roman thing. Kind of weird, right? It also looks like it has an area for a facade, which is emphasized in Roman architecture. I think that this would be considered like an acropolis. According to Metaton, putting a temple atop a pillar is a very Roman thing to do. Both temples of Hera, the Basilica, and the Temple of Neptune vibes from this mysterious little acropolis as well. This looks incredibly Byzantine, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. It appears to be built in the Ionic style, with similarities to the monasteries of Daphne in Greece. The Tower of Winds in Athens is the oldest octagonal tower, which is still standing today. This very well could be the inspiration for the Divine Towers, which to me just doesn't fit aesthetically. It's easy to see the likeness that the Carians would have to the Greeks, stargazers who share knowledge and were a star-worshipping empire. Sounds like the astronomers to me. Then it is no surprise to see the proximity between Old and the Carian Academy. Hellenistic culture took over Rome. They admired their sculpture and aesthetic style, and it has slowly been adopted into the Roman Empire. Its influence even later permeated leadership, which definitely reminds me of the marriage between Renala and Radagon. Charlemagne founded the Great Carolinginian Empire. Also, one of his portrait bears a striking resemblance to Rykard. Look, he's got the drip right there. This guy owned elephants and expanded his empire for some #sick trade routes. And on a side note, Napoleon's conquest daddy was Charlemagne. The Charlemagne Tower really could represent the Divine Towers. I mean, look at these windows. The towers are both octagonal in shape, and clearly they got similar vibes, man. And this guy, Charlemagne, lived in Aachen. Aachen was the third largest place of pilgrimage in Europe and a religious center for worship. Rhea Lucaria was almost clearly inspired by the Aachen Cathedral. Built around 796 AD, 32 pillars were brought from Rome and the slabs of marble from Jerusalem to the Aachen Cathedral in Aachen, Germany. The cathedral was built on the remains of the Roman thermal complex and on the site of the Merovingian chapel. The Merovingian was a ruling family first being mentioned when fighting with the Romans in Gaul. This thermal complex clearly mirrors the lake of rock containing the archaic Hellenistic Roman-inspired ruins beneath. The Aachen Cathedral was based on the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna, Italy, and has the same color palette and was decorated with gold similar to Fair Missoula. One of the myths surrounding the church is the legend of the devil and the wolf. It is said that the devil lost his thumb upon slamming the door shut, and it is still within one of these lion heads on the door. It's only fitting then that Vari takes our finger from nearby Rhea Lucaria, especially given that Vari leads the Tarnish to Mogwin Dynasty. Inspired by the Temple of Solomon, the Aachen Cathedral is meant to represent the creation and the perfection of a divine order. Charlemagne contracted skilled workers to preserve the Roman ruins underneath, and built on top a church that was both Baroque and Gothic. The imperial palaces connect with the church, and it was seen as two sides of the same coin. That is, a chamber for those ruling earthly affairs, and a chamber for the divine ruler. The Aachen Cathedral holds masterpieces of Ottoman art. The Shrine of the Virgin Mary was completed in 1238. The 4 great relics of Aachen are kept within the shrine. 1. The dress Mary gave birth to the second Son of God. 2. The swaddling clothes of baby Jesus. 3. The loincloth that Christ wore on the cross. And 4. The cloth on which St. John the Baptist's head was placed. There are countless other treasures, though. The cross of Lothair is a jeweled cross, a crux gramata, dating back to 1000 AD. Gold, rock, crystals, gem, enamel. It is considered to be, quote, an important monument of imperial ideology, and was made in a transition period between the Ottoman and the Romanesque art periods. This reminds me of the Erdtree seal, but more so of the Golden Order seal item description, a formless sacred seal depicting a ceremonial observation of order. Enhances Golden Order fundamentalist incantations. Fundamentalism is scholarship in all but name. And a funny little thing about the center of this cross, it kind of looks like the Radagon icon, which just so happens to also be found within Rey Lucaria, a legendary talisman depicting the Elden Lord Radagon. As the husband of Ranala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. Reliquary of the arm of Blessed Charlemagne, and it is said that Charlemagne's bones are contained within it, and the Valkyrie prosthesis seems to be inspired by this treasure. Golden prosthesis once used by the one-armed Valkyrie, a masterwork of craftsmanship. With practice and skill, it can be used as proficiently as a real arm. When Malay Murray, Lord of the Shaded Castle, embraced this prosthesis, he claimed to feel the presence of his personal goddess. Fucking weirdo. One can't help but draw comparisons between Marika and Julius Caesar. Years of military conquest and triumphs made Marika the one in charge. It's not exactly the same story, but the major beats still linger. Protection of the Erdtree. In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. Taking out Pompey the Great gave Caesar power, just as taking out the giants gave Marika her power. Julius Caesar became a dictator for an unlimited amount of time, the same as Marika became Queen Marika the Eternal.
In Marika's own words, the Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order, or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart.
And obviously, the conspiracy against Julius Caesar resembles the Knight of the Black Knives. Godwin's friendship with Fortisax is what gave rise to the ancient dragon cult. It's gotta make you wonder, what is the conspiracy that the Nox committed? The Finger Slayer Blade, the hidden treasure of the eternal city of Nokron. A blade said to have been born of a corpse. This blood-drenched fetish is proof of high treason committed by the Eternal City and symbolizes its downfall. It cannot be wielded by those without a fate, but it is said to be able to harm the Greater Will and its vassals. Which, like, straight up, that looks like the Sacred Relic sword, right? Like, everybody's knows this, right? Sword wrought from the remains of a god who should have lived a life eternal. Thoughts on what it portends are many and varied. Some think it the mark of a great sin, or the sign of great devastation. Some think of it as the end of an age, while others think of it as the beginning. Could have been part of Marika's corpse, or perhaps even part of Godwin's corpse. Maybe it was born from the twin bird? Regardless, what was it used for? What is it supposed to mean? One of Quailag's videos, she mentioned that this could have been used to kill all the fingers atop the Divine Towers. Now, as many of you have noted, Mesmer the Impaler could have been the one to impale Marika. This is almost a secondary beat, as it was speculated that Brutus, who participated in the conspiracy, was an illegitimate child of Julius Caesar. If this were a similar story beat, this would imply that Mesmer was convinced to impale Marika by someone. Could it have been the greater will ordering Godwin to die against what Marika wanted? Or did Ratigan, fed up with Marika's bullshit, convince Mesmer to impale Marika? These scenarios are, of course, only relying on the similarities in story beats to Julius Caesar. The assassination of Julius Caesar broke Rome apart into a series of civil wars. This calls to mind how the Shattering created a power struggle for the demigod children. I'm a classically trained artist, subtle flex, and I couldn't help but ponder this pose that Mesmer strikes. Posing in art is very important for conveying the stature of a subject. Mesmer's power pose is just so dang curious. See, the classical Greeks typically stand with their weight shifted on one leg or the other. Lots of Instagram models and beige moms do it to look thin and cute. This pose is known as contrapposto. This was later adopted by the Romans, as seen in depictions of Julius Caesar. Okay, see how all of his weight is stacked on top of one leg? This is why Mesmer's pose is just so off-putting to me. So I thought a little harder and I dug a little more, and I remembered, oh yeah, almost every depiction of great Egyptian deities have specifically this pose, left leg forward and right leg behind, but the weight is equally distributed between both legs. Baroque architecture and art was a response to the Protestant Reformation from the Catholic Church, and boy did it clap. See, it helps when people can see what they're worshipping. They like pictures and colors. The primary colors adorned everything. Much of the architecture depicted religious figures. Baroque domes were uniquely painted to be seen from the correct perspective from the ground. Movement, emotion, historical depictions, drama, and extreme realism were vigorously applied to nearly every possible surface, especially to the altars. The prologue is told through paintings, which are similar to the historical paintings that emerged in early realistic art depictions. Many of the paintings in the game, both collected and found naturally in the environment in Elden Ring, are reminiscent of this extremely realistic art style. This is where some of the greatest painters of history emerged: Vermeer, Rubens, Caravaggio, Carracci, Poussin, Gentileschi, Velázquez, and my personal favorite artist of all time, Rembrandt. Which, sidebar, Charlie and I had a few hours leaving the Netherlands, and we didn't know what to do, so we had a choice, a museum or a palace. I chose a museum. We ended up in the House of Rembrandt. I forgot that he was from the Netherlands, and seeing those paintings up close was unreal. The contrast between light and dark. Most of the light would only illuminate one part of the subject, and these paintings of this period flexed extreme realism. Instability was conveyed through asymmetry. Stories could be deduced in each painting through the symbols used by the artist and the allegorical characters depicted. And this had a strong influence on Italian architecture, which obviously Rome is a huge influence in Elden Ring. Thanks to commentator Douglas Ferreira, I began searching for ancient lighthouses. The empire on which the sun never sets is a particular term for territories that were so gosh darned huge that one part of the territory was always in sunlight. The Alexandria depicted in antiquity is the inspiration behind Fair Missoula. In antiquity, this major port in Alexandria was a strategically chosen island. It was both accessible by water and difficult to reach. I feel like I've heard someone else mention this in a video and I haven't been able to find it, so if I'm retreading old territory, that's why. This city in Alexandria is surrounded by walls, the longest ramparts in the Western world, that had to be able to resist impact from being impaled. The city could choose to be open or closed. A highway cuts the city in two. On either side of the island is the Gate of the Moon and that of the Sun. In one of the temples within Alexandria is a statue of Serapis. Allegedly, Serapis was invented as the new god that united Greeks and Egyptians by combining Osiris, Egyptian god of death, and Hades, Greek god of the underworld. This new god promises rebirth after death. Alexandria was the center of the Mediterranean trade and melting pot of the known world. Trade was naturally a part of the port, which made the people there rich in more ways than one. Trade was their true religion. Imagine this great walled archaic city on the ocean, and it's constantly battered by shipwrecks. The whole dang shore is just pieces of ships. So Ptolemy made a plan. The island of Pharos was chosen for a lighthouse. They had to build a highway on a sandbar over the water. The road was built on the axis of the world, and in Norse mythology, the axis mundi manifests as a tree, as a path to ascend or descend into other realms. Ptolemy wanted a symbol for power of the dynasty over nature. The towering lighthouse was made from white stone that hardens on contact with water, using metal for mortar. Day and night, there was a fire constantly being burned in a huge fraser. The lighthouse was a fire tower lit for 17 centuries, until an earthquake collapsed it. If this is truly the inspiration behind Fair Missoula, it would align nicely with prior speculations made by tarnished archaeologists about Caelids somewhat representing Alexandria, that is, if Fair Missoula was connected to the bestial sanctum. I've gone back and forth about this place so many times. After the lighthouse collapsed into the water with assuredly no return, a new lighthouse was constructed on top of the land it once stood on. If this was truly Fair Missoula, then it would indeed make sense that a whole new temple would be constructed on top of this land. Then the map the Monkey K reconstructed is very convincing as well. So I just need answers. The little figures depicted in Fair Missoula is another point of contention for me. While doing all this research on ancient Rome and stuff, I came across this medieval alabaster version and child which was likely made around 1350 AD in the Midlands of Britain. This was given to the British Museum in 2017. The pose of the figures is an excellent match. The version is missing the bouquet and the hand is more covered by her robe, but nearly everything else is identical. It's actually a pretty cheeky way of hiding who this might be depicting. The most notable thing to me is the depiction on the chest of the Virgin. It looks a lot like the sword of the Glow-Eyed Queen and a part of the Elden Ring and Malekith's boss chamber. So, with the evidence available, I think it would be safe to assume that this woman holding a child could be the Glow-Eyed Queen. Melina is the kindling, and Mesmer is the flame. Hopping back over to Norse mythology, Fenrir is a creature with a brother. Fenrir spent much of his time among the gods.
You need to leave.
What if I don't wanna? Fenrir got real mad and plotted to remove the gods from existence, only to get decked himself. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica on Fenrir, quote, he was gagged with a sword and destined to lie bound to a rock until the Ragnarok, Doomsday, when he would break his bonds and fall upon the gods. According to one version of the myth, Fenrir will devour the sun, and in the Ragnarok, he will fight against the chief god Odin and swallow him. The guy who killed Fenrir survived. For some reason, when I think of the demigod children being tied to a rock, I think of Mesmer being trapped in this land of shadow, waiting. The Flame of Ruin was sealed, right? There's this sigil on the back of the collector's edition, and I've been just staring at it. Is this meant to be the seal on the Flame of Ruin? Okay, so here's the thing. There's this fire on one side, and the circle on the other. The circle is the exact shape that's on the table in the round table hold. This side could represent the lands between. On the other side is the fire. This is Mesmer's flame, meaning he possesses it. This half could represent the land of shadow as a whole. Down the middle is a staff with something twirled around it, and I think that this is meant to represent the veil between the worlds. This entire sigil is held together by a circle. I have a video about Melina being a demigod Empyrean child of Marika. There's this one detail that I did not mention because I did not notice it until very late into the editing process. She wears a pendant that kind of looks like one of the Great Runes. And if you were to kind of push the pendant together, then it would look like the ring around the sigil. Some of the assets were further data mined by Sekiro Dubi, and everyone should take a minute and subscribe to their channel because they are doing amazing work for the community. They dug up some of the asset names from Melina which were translated by Iento. The translations are very curious. Quote, encounter with my daughter Marika. The flame of Marika's cloak. Daughter Marika appears. This almost certainly confirms that Melina would be the child of Marika. But encounter? Is Marika encountering Melina? Is Melina actually Marika? Can Marika embody Melina sometimes, just like how Shibriri does? Maybe Marika needed the Tarnished to die so that they would lose their memories to death. Everyone around the block has speculated about Messmer being the third child born in the brood with Melania and Mikla, but I don't think so. I think that Messmer and Melina are twins. I think that both of them were meant to hold the seal in the Flame of Ruin. Perhaps the only person who could truly be kindled is Melina, because there's always been something really mysterious about the scene. The bond between Melina and Messmer would allow us to burn the Erdtree and brandish the Elden Ring. Melina is the kindling, and Messmer is the flame. Two birds with one stone. If the Republic represented the Nox, perhaps they plotted the assassination of the Glowmite Queen and the Twin Bird in one fell swoop. According to Smotown's favorite lore item, the Albinoric blood clot, the thick coagulated blood of the Albinorics. Albinorics are the life forms made by human hands, thus many believe them to live impure lives untouched by the Erdtree's grace. According to Ted Ed, in medieval times, alchemists tried to transform lead into gold. Hypothetically, gold can be made, though it's incredibly expensive and costly to reproduce and would take about a bazillion years to make like a gram in a particle accelerator. The Nox were trying to make a god, and this is confirmed by the Mimic Tears. Mimic Tears are the result of an attempt by the Eternal City to forge a lord. In the real world, gold is extraterrestrial. It forms in a supernova, and according to Ted Ed, it's the remnants of this supernova that showered Earth in gold. Elden Stars. It is said that long ago, the Greater Will sent a golden star bearing a beast into the lands between, which would later become the Elden Ring.
In Marika's own words, hark, brave warriors. Hark, my Lord Godfrey. We commend your deeds. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mount. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
From the Encyclopedia Britannica, the Imperial Epoch, the final forms of Roman paganism.
After the prolonged horrors of civil war had ended, 30 BCE, the victorious Octavian, the adoptive son of the dictator Caesar and founder of the imperial regime or principate, decided, correctly, that the ancient religion was far from dead, and that the restoration of all its forms would respond to a strong popular, instinctive belief that the disasters of the past generations had been due to the neglect of religious duties.
This aligns nicely with Shinto culture as well, which requires a shrine maiden to venerate certain kami at temples. Typically, kami of physical phenomena like thunder, wind, fire, and so forth must be appeased by the people, or they do bad things like floods, severe storms, and earthquakes. Going back to the Encyclopedia Britannica,
Octavian himself took the name Augustus, a term indicating a claim to reverence. This did not make him a god in his lifetime, but, combined with the insertion of his numen,
I guess Sweet Tarnish shouldn't be too surprised. Numen is defined as divinity, divine presence, or divine will.
And his genius, originally the procreative power that enables a family to be carried on into certain cults, it prepared the way for his posthumous deification, just as Caesar had been deified before him. Both were deified by the state, because they seem to have given Rome gifts worthy of a god.
I speculate that the Nox were the ones who summoned down the Elden Beast for its gold, to make an eternal god, to create Marika. I don't think that Marika wanted to follow the plan the Nox laid out, which echoes really nicely with what happened to Republic. It backfired on them. So I've been going back and forth for a while about the themes of death, the respawn mechanic, and the world of shadow, the Sea of Fog. Primeval Current also has a strong influence with the ocean stuff, sea stuff. Something the ancient Celtics who traveled the seas believed in was the veil between the physical and the spiritual world. During Samhain, which is around Halloween, the veil is at its thinnest.
It starts with the belief in the other world and the veil being thin between this world and the other.
The veil is more of a concept than a thing. It's a metaphor.
The festival to start the year, the first fire was lit at Clockta.
All fires had to be extinguished at Halloween because fire could attract evil spirits. So the druids here had to settle the spirits and carry out the ceremony that made all well for the coming year. And when they had completed, they lit a fire to symbol that all was well.
After thinking about the Round Table Hold since the last video, I believe that the veil originates from the Round Table Hold. Charlie, Benoon, and I just can't get over the fact that the grace at the table looks like a person. That's just like a little coffin or something. Perhaps the veil, just like the mimic veil, comes from the top of Marika's head. And nobody ever talks about this. That there's more runes at the Lost Table of Grace than the whole Elden Ring has. Gold meant the presence of God on Earth. I mean, it literally comes from space, right? I needed to know more about this veil. There isn't a ton of information on early Norse mythology, but then Benoon dug up this article, The Origin of the Veil Between Worlds by Matt Aron. Quote, the idea of the veil refers to the veil of nature personified as the goddess. Traditionally, the goddess was referred to as Isis, Artemis, Diana of Ephesus, or Athena. The idea seems to originate from the classical Greco-Roman authors Plutarch and Proclus. The concept was that the goddess veiled was the natural world that we can see, while the goddess unveiled was the preternatural world that was hidden from our perception, the mysteries. However, it was the name of the goddess, the same world just separated by a veil of illusion. This idea continued to gain popularity from the 17th to the 19th century when the idea of unveiling this figure inspired the occult knowledge. I don't know about you, but this vessel don't look super lively to me. If you haven't noticed, Marika's not home. At all. Not to mention, literal darkness and the Elden Ring itself kind of puppet the body. So, maybe Marika is the one in the round table, holding the veil eternally, suspended in a memory. In other words, the veil comes from Marika, and perhaps it's even our job to unveil her. In conclusion, our deep dive into the parallels between Elden Ring and ancient Rome, alongside myths and architecture, reveals a profound impact historical elements have on shaping the game's world and narratives. The themes of order, discipline, and moral complexities faced by the characters echo the struggles and stories of our own world's past. As we've explored the connections between the lands between and the ancient civilizations of Rome, Greece, and Alexandria, it's clear that Elden Ring is more than just a game. It's a canvas where history and mythology blend seamlessly with fantasy. This journey through Elden Ring's echoes of the past not only enriches our gameplay experience, but invites us to ponder the lessons of history and the universal challenges of power, identity, and destiny. Whether through the grandeur of its architecture or the depths of its lore, Elden Ring invites us to explore a world where every detail has a story, rooted in the very fabric of human history. Thank you to my channel members. If you'd like to support the channel, then you can do so by becoming a channel member or becoming a patron on Patreon. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.